All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Glenn Gould Foundation's Promise of Music Forum and our session on the musical brain and impacts of music learning, Part 2, the Cerebral Symphony Orchestra. Now, you may have heard of Glenn Gould, a famous Canadian pianist, but you might not know about our foundation. So I'll just give you a brief description about what we do. Glenn Gould used his talent and celebrity to reach people beyond the confines of what was traditionally accepted for his time. A revolutionary, he bridged the human divide of the East-West Cold War barrier through his performances in the USSR. In the studio, he transformed the way music was recorded and explored the use of new technologies, including television and radio, to reach a larger audience with a message larger than the music itself. Finally, he set the example of the power of music to impact lives. The Glenn Gould Foundation exists to extend Canadian and international awareness of Gould's spirit and legacy by celebrating innovation and excellence, promoting creativity, encouraging cultural diplomacy, and introducing programs that demonstrate the power of music and the arts to transform lives. Thank you so much for joining us this week at the Promise of Music. It's been a wonderful opportunity to meet all of you. We couldn't be more happy with our first World Congress. And on behalf of the Foundation, thank you for spending this next session with us. I look forward to introducing our moderator for this session, who will be introducing our distinguished presenter. Please welcome Dr. Laurel Traynor to the stage.
So good afternoon. We have a really interesting session here. I'm just going to give a very brief introduction to Peter, and then he can spend more time talking to you. So he's a professor in the Department of Curriculum and Pedagogy at the University of British Columbia. And there he leads courses in teaching and learning of music education, contemporary qualitative and quantitative research methods, creative pedagogies, curriculum theory through an arts lens. So he has a wide-ranging interest. He's been working for decades and has lots of things to tell us about. He's published over 90 refereed papers and book chapters. He's very interesting because he crosses the more quantitative and the more qualitative divides and is equally comfortable in both. So welcome him, and we look very much forward to hearing what he has to say.
Thank you, Professor Traynor. Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, there we are. So, I'm going to speak to two studies today because they are closely related, and I'll start with our study from 2020. What were we most surprised to learn from this study? Well, it was the magnitude of the impact of our findings. We calculated effect sizes to demonstrate the effective, impressive differences in academic achievement between music and non-music learners. Now, significant differences aren't always practical. You always see in statistical studies significant at such and such level, but effect sizes tell us something that is really, really important. The effect size tells us about the practical significance of the differences in groups that we compare. The effect size is the raw, practical difference between group means, the absolute effect of the amount of music engagement and higher school grades in music that impact and predicts increases in academic achievement in math, science, and English provincial exam scores. Now in British Columbia, we have provincial exam scores, provincial exams in grade 10 for math, science, and English, and in grade 12 for English. Also social studies, but we focused on math, science, and English specifically for a number of reasons, and I'll get to that later. So for both the 2020 and the present study, Students who were highly engaged in instrumental music were, on average, over 1 year ahead in their math, English, and science skills compared to those peers who were not engaged with school music. This is incredible for us. We weren't expecting it. It was surprising to see, one, such consistency across diverse domains, English, science, math. Second, such substantive effect sizes, even after controlling for sex, male, female, ethnicity, we were able to look at that through language spoken at the home, socioeconomic background, and there were a number of studies we were able to use that were produced through the School of Population and Health at UBC. Professor Goon and Scott Emerson are both in that school at UBC. The excuse me, prior achievement in grade 7 numeracy and literacy provincial exams were controlled, so we knew what we were looking at. Number 3, we saw a dose-response type pattern. And that's what that nice little chart there shows us, that the more courses kids took, the higher their academic grades were. Incredible. And they were predicted. So there was also a clear trend showing more pronounced predictive associations with instrumental music relative to vocal music. So, do exam grades vary by specific types of and combinations of engagement? Well, yes, they do. And this was something that I used at AERA, the American Education Research Association conference in New York City in 2018. And we pulled this out because the new chair of the National Endowment for the Arts was in the audience, and we knew that they would be there. So we thought we would share that with them, and I also thought that since we were here at the Glenn Gould Foundation sponsored event, that we would see that all the way out here on the right-hand side, conservatory trained and piano students had the highest scores in provincial examinations. They're the most engaged over the longest period of time. So at this point, in October 2025, we can say that this is a music phenomenon. In this related paper, back in 2018, we shared that only music and none of the other arts, not drama, not visual art, and not dance, have this kind of significant, dramatic impact on academic achievement in high school math, science, and English. There may be other benefits that the arts, sports, and other in and out of school activities confer, even 4-H, which some of you are familiar with, the head, heart, hands, and health movement. And 4-H is very important to me in particular because out of that realm came something called positive youth development. I've been hearing a lot about youth development the last 5 days here at the conference. And I'd like you to start using the terminology positive youth development, PYD. It's been around for about 25 years in research literature, developmental psychology literature, and it's been with us even longer coming through sociology. In the 2020 study that we did, only prolonged engagement with instrumental music and more of it in the secondary school years has this amazing impact on learning in math, science, and English. Remember, however, and this is important, that many students begin to play band and orchestral instruments in grade 5, 6, or younger. So, in essence, this is a longitudinal phenomenon, and if Peter Schneider had been here today, he would be able to speak to his 2023 study that worked with a large sample in northern Germany, part of the JEKI program, J-E-K-I, and I can speak to that a bit more later. So this is, in a sense, a longitudinal phenomenon, even though we don't call it a longitudinal study. So many studies in the 1990s, James Catterall, a developmental psychologist at UCLA, Richard Deasy, who did an amazing compendium of research for the Arts Education Partnership in 2002, going up to 2017 with a disturbing paper that was published in the Educational Researcher by Foster and Jenkins. Many studies studied these examined the relationships between arts-based learning and students' academic and social development, as well as music skills transfer. But the findings were mixed. This disturbed us. Catterall's works from the late 1990s and Deasy's compendium informed us back in 2005-06, and eventually when we published our 2007 study, Gazousis, Goon, and Kishore, where we also did a predictive multiple regression analysis, and we were able to show that students who achieved high or had high grades in music, in band, orchestra, or instrumental music, let's call it, vocal music, choir, jazz choir, and also composition and theory courses, that those high grades predicted high achievement in the grade 12 English, science, or biology, and mathematics provincial exams. However, we didn't have controls. And what was often thrown at me was, well, how do you know it wasn't that kids were already very good at math, and that's why they did good at music? Well, that was something I would just say, yeah, all right, fine. Well, we were able to come at that differently with this 2020 and 2025 study. So before our 2020 study, Foster and Jenkins, in that 2017 educational researcher paper, they refuted all of this previous research in our field, which is why we did that 2020 study and published it in the Journal of Educational Psychology, and also the present study that is in review. We recognize, and I say this as a disclaimer, we recognize the inherently complex nature of arts learning and practices, as well as important differences conferred between benefits of the arts. But this is why we frame the present 2025 study in something called relational developmental systems theory, as well as positive youth development. And the two are inextricably linked these days through research that was done by Willis Overton and Richard Lerner and many, many others over the last 10, 15, 20 years. It's important to clarify that the 2020 study by Goon, Emerson, and Gazousis, and this present study that I'm going to share later on, we went beyond simple correlation analysis. People say to me, oh, that was a correlation study. No, 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 no. It was not. This is a regression analysis. And with regression analysis, we can say that music achievement predicts academic achievement and not the other way around. And we can say that music engagement and more of it predicts academic achievement and not the other way around. So these regression analyses are one way, and we can't say, in other words, that, well, can't you flip it around and say that math achievement predicts music achievement? No. Just for kicks, even though we know the model works and we knew that our analyses were correct, we did it the opposite way and we had a good chuckle. It doesn't work. So we were able to control for prior mathematics learning through the grade 7 foundation skills assessment scores in numeracy and literacy. And this is very important because now people can't say, well, it's because kids were already good in math. Sorry, we controlled for that. So, what makes instrumental music particularly positive and good for improving academic achievement? Well, there are 4 mechanisms or 4 core pathways that link instrumental music making to academic achievement, and an important one is something called executive functions. Skills learned in band, orchestra, and conservatory music lessons transfer very broadly to adolescence learning in school. For example, improved music audiation, and audiation is the ability that all humans have to think or process music in the mind when the sound isn't necessarily physically present, is correlated with the size and the shape of the Heschel's gyrus in the auditory cortex. And based on prolonged and more music engagement, this HG in the auditory cortex changes. So we know all about plasticity through observing the impact that music has on the HG. So this first pathway relates music training directly to academic achievement via this set of competencies termed executive functions, and one of my dear colleagues at UBC, Adele Diamond, is one of the world's experts on executive functions. I highly recommend you look at her work. These cognitive functions focus on control and regulation of behaviors and thoughts. So through instrumental music, we learn shifting between mental and physical tasks. We enhance recall through music audiation or thinking musically in working memory. We learn control or inhibition over expressive behaviors, and we're constantly updating cognitive and kinesthetic actions. Think about it. Updating is about audiating, where the music was, where it is in the moment, and where it's going. Constantly making mental comparisons and making physical adjustments to create the music sound that you are thinking, to create the music sound that you audiate, and to make it come alive through your voice, through your fingers, through your instrument. Transfer skills, the cognitive flexibilities gained through EFs and music, are highly likely. So EF research is mostly linked to instrumental music, and there are a few studies that I've shared with you here. Improved music audiation is correlated with the size and the folds of the Heschel's gyrus, which are very plastic. They change over time with the more music you make, the more music you engage with, the more music you do. So for me, these days, the more I think about it and the more I study this research and hear people here and read more of the work that's coming out of Austria and Germany and Switzerland particularly, music audiation is music working memory. Diamond, I'll give you an example here. Adele Diamond defines working memory as, quote, holding information in the mind and mentally working with it. This involves relating new information to old, using it for reasoning, problem solving and planning, and manipulating it to make sense of events unfolding over time. Working memory is essential for understanding complex information like stories, instructions, language, and I'll add, music, by linking past and present information. Working memory is more than merely storing information. It's using it and updating it, playing with music ideas and relating those music ideas with one another. So making mental music, then transferring it to your voice or instruments, along with inhibition, that control that one brings to the situation of playing and practicing and playing with other people, performing, and cognitive flexibility. They are core to executive functions. So plainly speaking, music making is as much cognitive as it is a physical action. Now, researchers attribute these EF phenomena to neurological development and a combination of increased capacities, plasticity, as the brain changes in the structure and function of the auditory cortex, the Heschel's gyrus, as well as higher motivation and self-efficacy. And the research of Peter Schneider's teams have shown this repeatedly over the last 15 years. Now, EF researchers have primarily focused on the prefrontal cortex. Other researchers look at the cerebellum, others focus on the entire gray matter of the brain, and others look at the auditory cortex and the Heschel's gyrus. But it's a whole brain phenomenon, and we've heard that a lot, especially today. And I agree with that wholly. That's what the research tells us. Now, neurological bases of executive functions have been identified whereby the frontal lobe is hypothesized to be particularly salient in EFs. Relatedly, instrumental music training in childhood and adolescence has been found to be related to lasting changes to many neurological regions, especially, as I mentioned, the auditory cortex and the Heschel's gyrus. But EFs, this shows, are not merely skills. It's not merely something that's learned, because cognition, through this model, and looking at the brain development and music development, is both biologic and influenced by practice or skills development. So music skills development is synonymous with cognitive development. Playing a musical instrument requires the development of many skills, including reading complex symbolic systems or music notation, and translating it into sequential bimanual motor activity dependent on multi-sensory feedback, developing fine motor skills coupled with metric precision, memorizing long musical passages, and even entire compositions, and improvising within given musical parameters. We know from Schneider's research, and also the research that's being done in Switzerland right now, that those who practice twice as much as amateurs have significantly more gray matter in several brain regions than either amateur musicians or non-musicians. We've known for 20 years that plasticity can occur in brain regions that either have control over primary musical functions or serve as multimodal integration regions for musical skills, as well as language acquisition and speech development. And this is important. In the 20th century, psychologists and neuroscientists have used the term pitch perception, but I also like to use the term audiation and think about conception, thinking the music in your mind, whether the music is, or the sound of the music is actively present, or whether it's not. We're always thinking about music and making comparisons with what we're playing, what the person sitting next to us is playing, what is going on around us, what the conductor is asking us to do. All of these things play a role, and we could not do it without actively thinking or conceptualizing music. So, tonal and rhythm pattern conception for me, thinking musically is core to a lot of this European neuroscience research. We know it's crucial both to music and speech acquisition. In audiation research, we refer to pitch in terms of tonal patterns, not individual pitches. So patterns of music are strongly related to patterns in speech, and we heard this earlier at Professor Trainer's discussion. That was very fascinating. So by the mid-1980s, audiation in music and music education research became synonymous with something called musical aptitude. Tests that are used by European researchers now in neurological research, they measure audiation using primary measures of musical audiation, intermediate measures, advanced measures, and they do this longitudinally, as I mentioned in this recent 2023 study that Schneider led. Now, these are all tests of musical aptitude. We know that audiation is both genetic and neurobiological, and it's impacted at both behavioral and sociocultural levels. Learning-induced transfer effects are all about music learning and music making. Positive music transfer effects on general auditory skills, speech-related abilities, and cognitive development. Music learning improves working memory, and that's important across all aspects of learning, but even more importantly for overall positive youth development. So Marcus Christner has done this fascinating study where he's looking at the auditory system now and saying, well, it's for both music and speech. And he's gone one step further. If you look in his discussion, he said, well, you know, for hundreds of years we've said that music is a language. And now he says perhaps we need to start thinking in terms of language as a music, which is particularly salient in the way we're thinking at this conference in terms of the importance of music making and music to the development of the whole human. So motivation plays a role here, and motivation-related characteristics including learning disciplines, self-efficacy, mastery-oriented learning experiences, this is all related to executive functions. The processes of instrumental training, which often includes hours of practice, typically in solitude, commitment to the training, even with competing curricular and extracurricular activities, this all fosters related characteristics. Of course, as we heard in the presentation just before this one, there are the neurotransmitter chemicals, dopamine and serotonin and oxytocin, that are produced by listening to and making music. Also, music increases the blood flow to the brain and connectivity. That's all in the paper in the 2025 paper that we have in review. And Wendy Stewart did a really lovely job of talking about these neurotransmitter chemicals. Very important research that's coming right now, right at us. Also, this has been discussed quite a bit, the socio-emotional development pathway. And it's also closely related to the neurochemical transmitters because these chemicals that the brain produces, that the body produces actually, the vagus nerve is also involved in this, lower stress and boosts mood. So this socio-personal pathway involves students engaging in music activities as part of a group experience. And those group experiences, we may experience bonding and sense of team accomplishment. Also, ensemble music making is collaborative and generally non-competitive. It's an aspect of music that's been found to be associated with enhanced school climate and social interactions within many school contexts. So this is all important for us to remember. So there are at least these 4 pathways: the executive functions, the neuroscience connection, the motivation, and the socio-emotional facet. So now, the 2025 study. So this is kind of dangerous in a sense because back in the late 1990s, in Catterall's study, 1999, called Champions of Change, and it used to be available as a free download, a PDF, from the Arts Education Partnership, and I think it's still floating around out there. The main focus was on the music findings, but there was also work that he did in the same paper, let's call it, that where he showed that drama did not have the same impact that music had, but it was kept kind of under the carpet. And similarly, in our 2007 study, in the results, we mentioned that it was music achievement that predicted academic achievement from grade 11 music courses to grade 12 provincial exams. We did not find a similar effect for visual arts, but because there was no result, it was a null result, we didn't mention anything in the conclusions. So this was another motivating factor for us to say, we better look at this. So, we examined the predictive associations between various forms of engagement in school arts, and we were looking at provincial level exam scores. We used the same controls that we used before in the previous study. We did multi-level analysis of variance models to compare the exam scores of the different groups, no arts versus drama, visual art, instrumental music, and vocal music. And we accounted for grouping factors and were adjusted via sex. The cohorts, 4 consecutive cohorts from grade 1 through grade 12, cultural background, grade 7 numeracy and literacy scores, and neighborhood socioeconomic status, as I mentioned before. Here are the numbers. Music participation, especially instrumental music, predicted higher exam scores, whereas the pattern of predictive associations was mixed for drama and was reversed for visual arts. In other words, the higher the visual arts engagement, the more courses kids took in visual arts, it predicted lower exam scores. So here's the details on the mixed results for the drama students. They did have significantly higher scores on English 12, which one would think, well, they're engaged with language, English, so they should do better by grade 12. But there was no difference in terms of mean science 10 exam scores between those who took no arts relative to those who took school drama. And the Cohen's D values, the effect sizes, were very low or negative, as you can see. And for visual arts, as I mentioned, they were negative. The D values were minus 0.1 to minus 0.22. So, when we look at the participation, we found similar results. And the curious thing, or the interesting thing, I should say, that we were excited about was that even though the analysis was different and the comparators were different, we found similar high effect sizes for instrumental music. The D equals 0.42. And you saw that when we were comparing the two curves, the distribution of the scores, that it actually meant the same thing now with this 2025 study as it did 5 years ago, that it was a full grade level better in math, science, and English. So here are some details on, some more details on the numbers and how they all shake out. And I can provide this for you. You'll have the presentation actually also. And here are the numbers for drama. And as I mentioned earlier, low, low, negative, and low. And for visual arts, it's inexplicable. And there are a lot of reasons for this, and it has to do with mostly that here we are at this conference, the last 5 days, and especially today with our neuroscientists and people who have been studying the brain and looking at the impact of music on the brain. People have been doing a lot of this work since the mid-1990s. There isn't similar work in drama, visual arts, or dance. We don't know why. I don't know why. So, as I mentioned earlier, the most robust pattern comes to us from instrumental music. So, plainly, not all arts learning and engagement has the same impact on whole human development. So what do we have here? Well, increased cognitive capacities are predicted by music engagement, but it's complex. It's not easy to explain. We have to think about executive functions, socio-emotional skills development, motivation, self-agency, neurological development, plasticity and structure of function of the whole brain, but particularly, as I've been mentioning, especially through the work that Professor Schneider was going to share with us, the auditory cortex and the Heschel's gyrus, and the features of the HG, especially over time as kids engage with more music and make more music, and neurochemical production. So all of this is discussed in our paper within these broader frameworks of relational developmental systems and positive youth development. And here's some more details from the Seither-Pressler paper that Peter Schneider is the senior writer on. And they talk directly to audiation in this paper and their other papers. So this is not something that he was coerced to do. I happened to have met him back in 2014 for the first time, and I nearly fell out of my chair when I found that he was using primary measures of music audiation as one of his dependent variables. So positive youth development comes to us out of 4-H club research. And the 5 C's stand for competence, confidence, connection, character, and caring. And this is from Richard Lerner, 2009. So these 5 C's aren't merely generic. When we think about it and what we do in music teaching, music learning, working with ensembles, working with classrooms of kids, working in all sorts of music-making settings, these 5 C's resonate. In fact, if Margaret O'Sullivan were able to have come here later this afternoon, she would have talked about 9 C's. So she expanded it with her work with Music Generation Ireland, which is a program that she's one of the co-directors of. 120,000 adolescents participating in after-school music programs across Ireland. So that's where she's coming from. So the 5 C's plus 4 more is what she does. So I'd like us to reconsider adolescents as individuals who coactively nurture, cultivate, and develop positive qualities. Psychologists in the audience know that back in the 1920s, beginning with Stanley Hall's work, right up through the early 1990s, all research looking at adolescent development was negative development. So this is one reason why people started getting interested in well, what is it that we can say about adolescents and the conditions in which they can, things that they do, things that they participate in that are positive. And so they started looking in after-school programs, particularly 4-H clubs, and then other areas of after-school programs. And of course, people in sports, athletics, they've gotten a hold of it. It's gone across many fields, but it hasn't yet taken hold in music. We need to claim this. This is very important. It's core to what we do in and out of school. So here are a number of studies that are using this terminology. It's very funny that there was a book that was edited by Kaufman and Scrip in 2019, and they say music learning is youth development. Okay, youth development? Where's the word positive? It's not anywhere in the book, unfortunately. But you can see that there's also two colleagues of mine back in 2007 thought of theater for positive youth development, and then guess what? They did no more because they saw that it was getting too much into quantitative work and they were more interested in qualitative characteristics of work. And this is one of the problems in arts research. Everything has swung so far into qualitative in drama, theater, dance, and visual arts that we have very little going on right now in terms of quantitative research from which we can draw and make any kinds of cognizant and meaningful comparisons. So I gotten a lot of my ideas from William Damon. This early paper, What is Positive Youth Development, is a great place to start. And then Willis Overton's honorary presentation to the American Psychological Association is a great place to look. And here's a quote from Damon: "The positive youth development perspective emphasizes the manifest potentialities rather than the supposed incapacities of young people, including young people from the most disadvantaged backgrounds and those with the most troubled histories." And this is the basic skeleton of the relational developmental systems model, where we think of humans as being relationally complex, spontaneously active, self-creating, self-organizing, self-regulating and adaptive, from the genetic and neurobiological to the behavioral and sociocultural levels, co-acting, co-developing processes, reciprocal causality, complex positive and negative feedback action loops. It's quite comprehensive, and it was Overton joining up with Richard Lerner about 15 years ago when all of this started coming together, and where I'm trying to position our work these days, and hopefully people start seeing this in a bigger, more holistic perspective. The 2020 paper got a lot of attention. It's still the #1 paper in the Journal of Educational Psychology, comparing it overall from 2,780 outputs, and #1 of 18 of outputs of a similar age from the same journal. And it's 23,000 out of close to 29 million papers that have been published. So it's done very well to promote this idea about the importance of music and how music achievement predicts academic achievement, and more music engagement, more and more, also impacts positively academic achievement. So it's breaking this hypothesis that we've been working with for so many years, where school counselors get kids and they say, well, you already took a couple of music courses. You don't need any more music courses. Do advanced placement biology or advanced placement math, because you'll do better if you take those. But the thing is, the very thing that got kids to where they are doing well in school is music, and more of it. And that's what we need to keep emphasizing with parents. The kids know it, the parents need to know it. So, all I can say to you now is merci beaucoup, thank you very much. I have a number of suggestions and a number of strong beliefs about what we should be doing in schools. Whether you'd like me to share them now or in an informal discussion, that's up to you. I'll just say, in closing, one important thing is that if we know how important music is to not just all these forms of development that we've discussed over the past week, but also tangibly to academic achievement, to doing well in school and doing better in school by doing more music and doing well in music and doing really well in your academics, then why aren't we doing more of it? So we really need to think about this in terms of tangible, measurable numbers, and we have it right here. So all of you, please use this research and please use it. Be your own advocates. Thank you. Oh, that's not bad, 31 minutes. Okay.
Okay, well, let me start by saying thank you so much for that really interesting talk with lots of important information and different ways that we can view the value of music. So maybe I'll just start with a question or two, and then we can turn it over. We've got lots of time for questions from the audience.
Sure.
So let me just start by well, first of all, congratulations on these. I know these studies are not that easy to do, these large-scale studies, so thank you for doing those.
I'll say it took 2 years to get the data sets from the Ministry of Education, and during those 2 years, I spent a lot of time talking to teachers at teacher education gatherings and speaking to them about the courses. There was a lot to learn about all the intricacies of course codes, what counted toward graduation, what did not count toward graduation, why we couldn't find grades. I don't know if you have the same situation in Ontario, but in British Columbia, the only grades that count toward graduation is something called graduation program, grades 10, 11, 12. So, how do we know that kids are engaging more in music than other kids? Well, the kids who start in band programs, let's say, or choir programs in grades 5, 6, 7, go to secondary school, the band teacher says, oh, hey, play me something. So the child plays something, they say, oh, can you read this? Reads, goes through all the motions of doing a little pre-exam, let's say, an audition, and then the teacher says, well, look, you're really good. Rather than putting you in grade 8 band, I'm going to put you in grade 10 concert band. So the kids that start from grade 8 in grade 10 concert band, do that for a couple of years, get credit for grade 10 for 2 years, grade credit for grade 11, grade 12, then do some jazz band, then maybe some orchestra. These are the ones who are getting more engagement, and this is how we were able to tick or count more engagement. So that's something that it's hard to explain, but there you are.
Yeah, yeah. I know there's lots of intricacies in doing this kind of research.
Yeah, yeah.
So I guess one question I have is, why don't we unpack a little bit what you think it is about instrumental music that makes it different from other forms?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, and I think it's not merely a British Columbia phenomenon. I've lived in a few different places in North America over the last number of years, last 5 decades. And I can say that with learning to play an instrument, particularly the traditional approach in school, most kids will start with a method book and they learn how to read and then decode, as I mentioned earlier. They learn how to grapple with notation and learn how to make the notation come alive by moving their fingers and blowing through an instrument or doing whatever it is that they need to create music from notation and engaging with notation, and they practice a lot. They take their music home from school and they practice at home, not just for the individual instrument skills development, but also ensemble music. So there's a lot of stuff going on in terms of, and I mentioned inhibition earlier, which has to do with practice and that time that you spend in solitude. All of that stuff goes on with instrumental music making. It's not necessarily so in choral music settings. Kids don't take voice lessons. Kids don't get vocal lessons per se, even in homogeneous vocal groups like altos, sopranos, tenors, basses. They don't get individual vocal lessons, whereas with instruments, Quite frequently, you might have a clarinet, a homogeneous group of clarinets, and say, okay, clarinets, stay for a while. We're going to work on X part, these measures. And so teacher will spend time working with all the clarinets and the alto saxes, et cetera, and then put the ensemble back together. So there's a lot more involved in terms of practice and the time involved in working to learn how to play the instrument. And that is not precisely what happens with learning in choral music. So there's a big difference. I think that's what we do see an impact, a positive effect. We do have significant differences with the kids who are involved in vocal music, and we do see that the ones who have higher grades in vocal music do better, and it does predict their higher grades in academics, in the provincial exams, but not to the extent we see with instrumental. So it has to do with the way they learn. Yeah.
That's really interesting, yeah.
Well, did you sing in choir too?
I played an instrument.
You played flute, I heard earlier,
Yeah,
so you were one of the band and orchestra kids. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, and then just before we turn over to the audience, I have to ask a technical question. So, yeah, the regression approach you talked about is very powerful, but I guess in science, the gold standard is randomization.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that? Like, what about studies that you randomly assign, just for the audience, if you don't, you talked about lots of factors, you control for lots of factors, but it's possible there's other factors out there you didn't control for.
Sure. So, if you would have asked me this 15 years ago, I would have said, well, sure, let me approach school district X and school district Y and say, okay, let's randomly assign kids to band or not. Today in 2025, I couldn't do that. For me, that would go against everything I know about what positively benefits development. So it would be really terrible for me to suggest that I could randomly say, okay, you're not in band, you're not going to get any music, you're going to get music down here, you're not going to get any music, knowing that those of you who are engaged in music from grades 5, in some way from 5, 6, 7, and then certainly in secondary school through grade 12, that is going to have such a positive, dramatic impact on your overall academic achievement, among other things as well in school. So I can't legitimately do that. And so I don't know who could do a randomized study like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are.
Could you?
Well, no, but there are studies like that in younger kids where, for a short period of time, like maybe 6 months, you say, okay, this group gets music class, this doesn't. And then afterwards, you give everyone the music class.
Yeah.
So it's possible to do in shorter, probably with younger kids, but it's always difficult.
But then again, Laurel, I taught preschool music from mostly age 18 months through age 5. In community settings. I ran my own classes through Gwynedd Mercy University. It used to be a college, now it's a university, and other centers. And I knew that with these preschool music classes, at age 5, when I gave the kids, I administered primary measures of music audiation, I could see, wham, all the kids were way up there in the test scores. So I knew that what I had done during that period of time had impacted their audiation very positively. Whereas teaching in public schools, when I would administer PMMA to my age 5 kids in kindergarten, if I had 3 kindergarten classes, I'd see the scores all over the map, and I could see audiation all over the map. And if a child can't audiate well in kindergarten, I can do things that will help them, but everything's remedial. Everything is remedial, sadly. And so even though plasticity does exist, I am pulling teeth because I may only have these kids, if I'm lucky, 3 half-hour sessions per week. Usually teachers have them for one 15-minute session, and that's not enough. It's not enough to make up for all that lost time from birth through age 5. So it's complicated. We're just not doing enough for music, with music. It's not our fault per se. I think that we're all there. We're all on the same page. I'm preaching to the choir here. But it's a matter of administrators and ministers of education and anyone else who's in a position of political power to be able to say, okay, we're doing this, like they did in Venezuela, and said, okay, everybody's doing orchestra. Oh, El Sistema. Oh, that's wonderful. Well, we should have that here. I mean, we'd have a very smart country.
Wonderful. Okay, why don't we open it up to the audience? Yeah, so I don't know if there's a microphone
Way
in the
back
audience
there.
or not, but, oh, here we are.
If you'd like to stand and try and ask a question. No? Oh.
Are you okay if I?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, great data, and I'd like to connect to your very last thoughts. I'm a great partisan of population studies. I think they're beautiful, they're powerful, and I think, Peter, you gave an example. So 70,000 kids in BC, right? And you were looking into possible confounders, which is great. We always try to figure out if you have a latent variable that may confound things. But I think what you're coming up with is quite compelling. So are you planning to do longitudinal studies of the same population? Are you thinking that it's almost invincible for me not to think of that? Many of these kids are siblings. You can do sibling analysis and look into family share factors. And if you crisscross sibling analysis with longitudinal analysis, you can further refine what you're finding and giving more, I suppose, strong results. Last thought, just because I work with registries in Europe, in Scandinavia and elsewhere in Europe, I think it would be great if this country could unite their forces and have the different provinces coalesce around nationwide registries. That's what we need. And then by crossing registries, the amount of power and the amount of signal that people can catch are unbelievable. Just sparse thoughts, but I'd like to hear about your thoughts about these couple of ideas.
I think that they're all great ideas. We can't go back to the time period for those 4 consecutive cohorts. They're done. There were only certain markers that we can get at. So the possible confounding factors that we were able to isolate were the ones that we were able to isolate consistently and effectively. So that's why the study looks the way it does. As far as sibling research goes, I think it's fantastic. I think also, the last quote-unquote hereditary studies that were done that were reliable or that made any sense were done in the 1930s. And my mentor, Edwin Gordon, who developed these audiation tests, used to always say, well, Hazel Stanton showed in her 3 studies that in the 1930s that there was no relationship between adult talent in music and children being talented in music. But they weren't using very good tests at that time. And I think that for example, if you were to administer AMMA to parents and then PMMA to age 5 children, and see what the correlation is, or see if you could do a regression analysis on that. And you might even be able to do something where it might not be random assignment, but you might be able to say, well, these kids had preschool music, these kids did not, and be able to see if there were differences, that would be a possibility. And maybe with siblings, maybe. Yeah, this is all great stuff. I don't think I'm going to be doing this research that much longer. To be honest with you, I think that after this study, we're going to try to merge Another data set that from the Ministry of Health, because Martin Goon is in the School of Population and Health, and we're going to try and merge some other data sets to look at health and well-being and music engagement and more of it, and how that might have a relationship. So that's the next thing on the docket. But after that, I think somebody else needs to come into play, and more than welcome to come and particularly work with Martin Goon and Scott Emerson and a few other people there in School of Population and Health. So great ideas, though, Marco. Come on out to UBC.
So, first of all, thank you for this presentation,
I can't
Peter.
say, oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
When I first heard about the study, it really got me excited. And I think obviously one of the compelling factors is just the size of the sample you had to work with. It's extremely compelling. Looking at a lot of other research from a layman's point of view, I noticed a lot of studies have very small sample sizes, so this seemed particularly powerful. I'd like to try to connect a few different threads, and particularly an interest in early childhood development. Earlier in the week, we played an interview that I did with Dr. Gabor Mate, and as you know, he's very much focused on trauma, and early childhood trauma. But in our discussion of music, he talked about children being wired for music, even from prenatal experience, and the power that music can play in their development and also in healing. And so I'm wondering whether there exists any possibility of linking the research that you've done with different bodies of research that focus on young children because of factors like, for example, the first critical period of neurological development and how, exposure to music education can affect that. I'm influenced by the time I've spent in Venezuela, seeing El Sistema, seeing the classes progressing from toddler level to young children all the way up through adolescence. And it seems to me that if we could find some methodology by which to draw those connections and then even see further how much more powerful the early childhood experience can be in equipping children for their later lives in academic development. And also, I'm going to tack on a second part, which is non-scientific, but it addresses policy. Because as we all know, we're living in a country in which various ministries of education, when it comes time to look at the budgets, tend to think of the arts in general and music in particular, because it requires instruments and more expenses and specialized teaching, as a frill to be pared back or even cut altogether. And I think of this as a critical problem that needs to be addressed, and I know it exists in many other parts of the world. In Europe, there is a big push to reduce or eliminate music courses. And I've had conversations with policymakers, and I say to them, how much would you spend to get your students' GPAs up so that they're better equipped to enter university and become professionals and active, contributors to the economy? And when I mention music, I get blank stares. There's a huge disconnect. It's, I think, tragic and shows a tremendous lack of insight because of the backgrounds they come from. They just say, let's get some consultants or this Institute of Education Studies to take a look at it, and so on and so forth. And they tend to basically push it off. I don't think that they get it. And so the question is, how do we take this evidence, which is so powerful and so compelling, and in this country, in a Canadian context, and turn this into a change in policy direction, because I think that is vital. Anyway, I'll stop talking.
Yeah, I think so much, so with the last question, I even know that even in our own province, the BC Music Educators Association completely misinterpreted the study and did not realize the power and impact, that it was a predictive study. They thought it was a mere correlational study. And so there was a difficulty with that. So first, you got to get teachers to understand what the research says. So I've put together a very simplified 6-slide, 6 paragraphs, 5-minute presentation that music teachers can do at their spring concert or their fall concert or their holiday concert to give parents the information and word. I think that the push needs to come from parents, needs to come from the grassroots level. Teachers, BC Teachers Organization, the Ministry of Education, sadly, have moved away from testing and measurement. And so it's very difficult right now to get anything like what we got during that time period with the FSA Foundation Skills Assessment Grade 4 and Grade 7 exam scores and use them as a control, and to have those provincial examinations in Grade 10 and Grade 12. They're all optional now. So this makes things very, very difficult. So it's almost like an anti-measurement movement. Not only do I believe that we need to think about both oral conception and oral perception when we're thinking about music making, I think we need to think about quantitative research and qualitative research. We need both. The more research we have, the better. The more anecdotal we have, the better. The more hardcore numbers we have, the better. So it's not either or. We need everything. But yet, I think we're fighting a very, very difficult uphill battle on a number of levels. Insofar as preschool music education goes and the importance of it, oh my. Every parent I know, everybody, I have children come to my home for free. So I do sessions in my basement with the neighborhood kids and parents. Okay, just because it's necessary. And I have decided that I'm going to offer it at the local community center for free. I know people won't be happy with me, but I'm going to do it for free. So I mean, there needs to be a lot of this kind of outreach and a lot of advocacy, and not just one conference like this, but it's an ongoing daily advocacy. And as I said, I gave the information to teachers. They need to be the ones that are delivering the message. They need to get the parents on board. The kids are on board. We know this. So I don't know these answers. I know we need more research. I know we need more researchers engaged in it, but I also know more and more musicians aren't interested in doing the kind of work that you do or the work that I've done, right? Because they'd rather just play music and maybe do qualitative research.
Yeah, I just might add a comment to that, which is as music is under threat in the schools, it has a bigger impact on lower SES kids because they don't have the means to do it outside. Like the higher SES kids, their parents will take them, pay whatever to have it done. So it's just another aspect of how terrible it is that these things are being cut in the schools, because it's going to widen the inequities in society.
Yes.
More questions?
Thank you. Thank you for your great presentation. I don't know if it's a question or a comment, but I was thinking that when you were explaining about the 5 C's, for example, and how this is a holistic approach, of course, the center is the music training, the music experience, but at the same time, I was thinking that how important it is to make sure it's a good quality music education. And I'm saying this because sometimes just I have experienced like music training, long hours, but bad quality and physical injuries in the students. So it's it's part of a whole thing. It is very important to, and of course, this is maybe maybe I'm going a little bit out of the topic, but I think it's very much related and important to focus on what is the quality of the music training.
I agree.
Yeah,
And
for the teaching
unfortunately,
artists.
Margaret O'Sullivan isn't here. Her dissertation was on quality, what makes quality in her national music program. And I had a colleague who said, well, we need to do a philosophical discussion on quality and what quality is, et cetera. And I said, wait a second. No. You know how you're going to find out what quality is? Ask the kids in the program. Let's find out how learners define quality and what they think makes the quality of what it is they're learning and what keeps them engaged in making music. Why are there 120,000 kids in this program in Ireland? And so she is, her title used to be Director of Quality. I think they've changed it. But quality is something that isn't something that you or I define. Quality is something that the learner defines. And I can give you the information where to find that dissertation. You just look up Margaret O'Sullivan, UBC Circle, and you'll find the dissertation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So your very interesting study shows that exposure to music predicts better results in math and science, but you mentioned in passing that it doesn't work the other way around. So could you expand a bit on that? What you meant by that and how you proved it?
Yeah, so so basically, you know, and Laurel touched on this, correlation study is two-way. So it could either be prior, you know, how good you are at math impacts music, or vice versa, how good you are at music impacts math. So that's just a two-way correlation, simple correlation analysis. What we did was the regression analysis. So we did linear and multiple regression models, and we found that it was the music scores and the more music engagement that predicts the academic engagement, academic achievement. The third type of study you would do would be an experimental, looking at causal effects. And that would be where you would have groups of kids. You would start out with your study and you would say, okay, you're in, you're out. And then we would see over time who would do better in academic achievement. The kids who were engaged in music and scoring high in music, or the kids who weren't engaged in music and had no music scores. So something similar happened with cigarette research back in the 60s. Where they started out with correlation research and they said, well, it looks like, you know, smoking is related to cancer. And then they did some regression analyses and they said, well, it looks like if you smoke, it predicts getting cancer. And then when they actually got it together and they did the causal studies and said, you don't smoke, you smoke, okay, here we go. And they found that smoking causes cancer. So, like, I don't think I could justify and legitimize a causal study, but we came as close as you can to saying it's music that predicts academic achievement. It's more music that predicts doing well in academics, in provincial exam scores, right?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I knew that's what you were getting at. What I was thinking you meant was that, for example, if you took kids aged 3 to 5 and gave them intensive math education, which some people do, would they do better at music? And
yeah,
that's what I thought you meant.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
I don't think so either. Because I can tell you anecdotally, and they wouldn't release this research, but I was involved with the North Vancouver School District back in the 2000 to 2010 period. Because I worked with off-campus cohorts of K through 12 teachers, not music, not arts, but K through 12 teachers, and in creative teaching and learning tactics, strategies, graphics organizers, e-portfolios, all these different ways of approaching teaching and learning and assessing learning. And in a number of schools in North Van, they decided in grades 3 and 4 to give kids twice as much math twice as much math as they had been doing previously, because they wanted to increase the scores on the FSA grade 4 and FSA grade 7 numeracy, right? No, they went down. And not only that, when the kids went to secondary school in grade 8, they had remedial math in grade 8. They had to set up all these remedial courses in 3 secondary schools. So they stopped doing that. Unfortunately, my son was one of those learners, and that's why I know about this study, and I knew the 2 people who had set this up. They were in my master's cohort, and they knew that they made a serious error. So,
How's your son doing in music?
in music, he's a rock drummer. He's a rock and roll drummer. He's totally into it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that just speaks to motivation, right? So you can try to put more math in, but if kids aren't taught in a motivational way, it's not going to do them a lot of good. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, you were good in math. Yeah, I was really good in math. I did very well in math. But I always used to jokingly say, you know, I don't mind sitting down and doing math and working on my math homework and working out all these formulas and studying in calculus and linear algebra. I did computer programming for a while because I wanted to make more money and get out of teaching music at one point back in the late 70s, early 80s. And so, and then I said to myself, but you know, you're really good at this, but you know, it's one thing to sit down and do all this math and work out these formulas, and they're very elegant and it looks great. But isn't it funny that when you sit down and you do counterpoint, and you know, I would write these beautiful 2-part and 3-part inventions with and without an instrument, sometimes just sitting there and audiating and writing it down, that at the end of the day, I could sit down and I could play the 2-part or 3-part invention, but I couldn't do anything with the formulas. So that to me was the difference. But that's only because I knew the difference too. Anyway.
Okay, I'm afraid we're out of time, but I wanted to thank Peter once more for a really interesting talk and thank everyone here for a very interesting discussion.
Thank you for the questions, everyone. Thank you, Laurel. Thank you, Brian.